In a quiet corner of Arizona, where the desert wind whispered through cracked streets and faded buildings, Clara Whitmore sat alone in a narrow lawyer's office. The old ceiling fan hummed softly above her head, but it did nothing to calm the storm in her heart. On the desk in front of her lay a thick stack of legal papers, neatly arranged and waiting for her signature. To anyone else, they might have looked harmless. To Clara, they felt like chains ready to close around her life. Across the desk sat Victor Hale, a sharply dressed land developer with cold eyes and a smooth smile. He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked, studying Clara like a chess piece. He had been buying up land all over the county, turning old family farms into luxury resorts and gas stations. Clara's land was the last piece he needed. "Sign the papers," Victor ordered, sliding them closer to her. His voice was calm, but there was no kindness in it. "It's the best deal you're going to get." Clara swallowed hard. The land he wanted had been in her family for generations. It was where her husband had built their home with his own hands, where their son had taken his first steps, and where every memory of her simple, honest life was rooted. After her husband's passing, the land was all she had left. I need more time," Clara whispered, her hands trembling. "This is my home." Victor's smile tightened. "Time is something you don't have, Mrs. Whitmore. You're behind on taxes, and the bank is ready to take everything. I'm the only one offering you a way out." Clara looked down at the papers again. They were filled with words she barely understood, but she knew what they meant. If she signed, she would lose everything. Victor didn't know that Clara wasn't as alone as she seemed. Her son, Jake Whitmore, was thousands of miles away when her husband passed, riding across the country on his motorcycle. Life had taken him down a different road, one filled with engines, loyalty, and brotherhood. Over the years, he had become a full member of the Hells Angels. He didn't live a quiet life, but he lived by a strict code. And one of those rules was simple: family comes first. Clara had not told Victor anything about her son. She didn't need to, but deep in her heart, she believed Jake would come when she needed him most. Victor leaned forward, tapping the table. "This land is worth more to me than it ever will be to you. Take the money and walk away. That's your best option." A tear rolled down Clara's cheek. She thought of the small wooden porch, the old oak tree in the yard, and the nights she had spent watching the stars with her husband. She picked up the pen slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. Outside, far down the highway, the distant sound of engines began to grow. Clara paused, her hand hovering above the paper, unaware that everything was about to change. The faint rumble of engines outside slowly grew louder, echoing through the dusty Arizona street like rolling thunder. Victor Hale didn't notice at first. He was too busy watching Clara, waiting for her to give in. The pen was still in her hand, hovering just above the paper, when the sound suddenly became impossible to ignore. Clara looked up, her heart beating faster. That sound was familiar. It wasn't just traffic. It was motorcycles, many of them. Victor frowned and turned his head toward the window. Through the thin blinds, he saw shadows moving across the street, followed by flashes of chrome and leather. One by one, heavy bikes pulled up in front of the building, their engines roaring before shutting down almost in perfect unison. The sudden silence that followed was even more unsettling. "What is this?" Victor muttered. Before Clara could answer, the office door opened. A tall man stepped inside, his boots slow and steady on the wooden floor. He wore a black leather jacket with a bold Hells Angels patch stitched across the back. His hair was tied behind his head, and his eyes were sharp, but calm. Behind him, several other riders stood in the hallway, watching. Clara gasped softly. "Jake." Her son looked at her, and for a moment, the tough biker disappeared, replaced by the little boy who used to run across the yard of that same land Victor was trying to steal. "Mom," Jake said gently. "I got your message." Victor rose from his chair, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is a private legal meeting. You and your friends need to leave." Jake walked to the desk and placed his hand flat on the papers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My mother isn't signing anything," he said quietly. "Those papers mean she loses her home. And that's not happening." Victor's face tightened. "You don't understand. This is a legal sale. Your mother agreed to." She hasn't agreed to anything, Jake interrupted. You scared her, pressured her, and tried to trap her. That's not a deal, that's bullying. Clara slowly put the pen down. For the first time since the meeting began, Victor felt uneasy. The calm way Jake spoke was far more intimidating than shouting. You think you can just walk in here and change things? Victor snapped. Do you know who I am? Jake gave a small, cold smile. I know exactly who you are. And you don't own this land. My father built it. My mother lives there. That's enough for me. Jake turned slightly, and the men behind him shifted, making their presence very clear without saying a word. Victor swallowed. There's no need for trouble, he said quickly. We can talk about this. Jake nodded. We are talking. And here's how it's going to go. You walk away. You stop bothering my mother. And you never come near her land again. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Victor slowly pushed his chair back. He had planned to win this with paperwork and pressure. He hadn't expected this kind of resistance. Clara stood up beside her son, her fear finally fading. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. Jake picked up the stack of papers and slid them back across the desk. Meeting's over. Victor Hale gathered his briefcase with shaking hands, his confidence completely broken. Without another word, he walked past Jake and the bikers and hurried out of the office. Through the window, Clara watched him disappear down the street, his expensive car pulling away in a rush. The danger that had been hanging in the air was finally gone. Clara let out a long breath she had been holding for hours. She turned to Jake, her eyes filled with emotion. I didn't want to call you, she said softly. I know your life is different now. But I was so scared. Jake gently took her hands. You never have to be scared alone, Mom. No matter where I am, you're my family. That will never change. Outside, the other riders waited respectfully, giving them space. Jake knew his world wasn't easy to explain, but Clara didn't need to understand everything. She only needed to know that her son was there when it mattered most. They left the office together and stepped into the bright Arizona sunlight. The row of motorcycles lined the street looked powerful and intimidating, but to Clara, they now felt like a shield. Back at the old farmhouse, the familiar smell of dust and dry grass filled the air. Jake hadn't been home in years. The porch was worn, and the paint was peeling, but it was still beautiful in its own way. He walked slowly through the yard, memories flooding back, helping his father fix the fence, racing through the fields, and sitting under the big oak tree on hot summer days. I thought I might lose all this, Clara said quietly. You won't, Jake replied. I promise. Over the next few days, Jake stayed in town. Word spread quickly that Clara Whitmore's son was a Hells Angels rider. Suddenly, the people who once ignored her were polite and careful. The tax office stopped sending threats. The bank backed off. No one dared to push her anymore. But Jake didn't like the idea of his mother being protected by fear alone. He wanted something better for her. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set over the desert, Jake made a decision. Mom, he said, I'm going to fix this place up. Make it solid again. You deserve to live without worrying. Clara smiled. You don't have to do that. I know, Jake replied. But I want to. With the help of a few of his brothers from the club, the farmhouse slowly began to change. The fence was repaired, the roof was fixed, and the old barn was cleaned out. It was still the same home, but now it was stronger. When it was time for Jake to leave, Clara hugged him tightly. You saved me, she whispered. Jake shook his head. No, you raised me. That's what saved you. As his motorcycle disappeared down the road, Clara stood on her porch, watching until he was gone. She knew her life would never be the same again, but this time, it was for the better. The land was still hers. Her home was safe.